And we now come to the backbench debate on International Men's Day. Sam Rushworth to move.
Can I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and also the members of the Backbench Committee for granting this debate, and the 22 members across 5 parties who supported the application. I have a confession to make. Being new to this place, I did not know when I applied for the debate that the convention would be that I would be the first speaker. But it is an honour to be able to open this debate marking International Men's Day, which took place actually on Tuesday this week. And I hope that I'm able to give a voice to some of the men and boys in the area that I represent who maybe feel powerless and unheard. My second confession is that this is the first time I've ever spoken publicly about the health and well-being specifically of men and boys. I'm unashamedly feminist. My work before coming to this place was in international development, including supporting women's empowerment projects in northern Ghana, research on gender and education in Rwanda, and on a recent International Women's Day, I was in the Central African Republic meeting with and seeking international support for women leaders of the interfaith platform who are courageously working together to promote peace. In the UK, I've supported initiatives to break down barriers to girls entering science, technology, engineering and maths, and I'm also proud to belong to a party that's working to close the gender pay gap and setting a national mission to halve violence against women and girls. Gender inequality, as we all know, has long been seen through the lens of women's struggles, and rightly so. Women have fought tirelessly for equality of opportunity, for freedom from violence and discrimination. But when I meet with and listen to my constituents, there are also undeniable challenges specifically impacting the health, well-being and life outcomes of boys and men. And these are raised with me by women as well as men, because nobody fights for their sons more than mums. So may I be clear at the outset of this debate that International Men's Day is not a call to diminish the importance of women's rights, nor to overshadow the progress made in gender equality for all. Rather, it is to recognise that gender inequality harms everyone, men and boys, as well as women and girls. Men are more likely to die prematurely, more likely to develop alcohol addiction, more likely to be homeless, more likely to take their own life, more likely to be sent to prison, but also more likely to be a victim of violent crime. Yeah, okay, fine.
I commend the Honourable Member for Bishop Auckland for bringing this forward. He's right to highlight the issue of suicide, in particular Northern Ireland and the under-18s. We have more proportion of population, more people under 18 young men commit suicide than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. The figures over the last 5 years for suicide for men number almost 5,000. It is worrying and very concerning, and I thank the member for that. But can I just ask him a quick question? And is this men's health sheds that they have across the country are in great way. We've one in the Glen Community Association, Newton Ards. They do directly help young men and young teenagers as well address the issues.
Mr Shannon, interventions must be shorter than that. There will be plenty of opportunity to make a contribution, should you so wish, during the debate. Sam Rushworth.
Thank you, and I welcome the intervention. I will come on to talk about men's sheds, who I met with on Tuesday in the Speaker's House. But yeah, men are indeed more likely to take their own life. They're more likely to be excluded from school. And boys are also underachieving compared to girls at every level of education. And that's because gender inequality is not only structural, by which I mean the unequal division of power and resources as assigned through our rules and institutions, it's also cultural. It's embedded in social attitudes and expectations around manhood and womanhood. And it's here where I believe gender inequality really harms men and boys. may I also recognise, as I attempt to frame this debate, that men, like women, are diverse. There is more than one way of being male, and I refer here not only to sexuality, but to binary ideas of how men should behave. If you were to visit my home on a summer night, you might find Mrs. Rushworth in the garden lighting the barbecue and myself in the kitchen preparing the salad. And if you were to visit in the winter, you may find her bleeding the radiators while I'm singing a lullaby to settle one of our children in bed. So International Men's Day is an opportunity to celebrate male diversity and to promote kinder, more emotionally connected and liberated versions of masculinity as positive male role models for boys. I'd like to focus the rest of my remarks on two concerning byproducts of gender inequality that are prevalent in my constituency of Bishop Auckland: men's mental health and the concerning rise of male suicide, particularly among young men, and boys' underachievement at school, and why we must tackle these issues head-on for the benefit of both sexes. The crisis in men's mental health is one of the most significant issues of our time. It negatively impacts not only on the individuals concerned, but also their relationships with family, friends and work colleagues, and tragically is increasingly leading to suicide. In the UK, men are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than women, and it is now the leading cause of death of men under 50. The contributing factors for this are multiple, including debt, addiction, family breakdown, unfair deprivation of access to children. But what seems to compound all of this is loneliness and a sense of being trapped, carrying burdens alone. Too often, the societal expectation that men be stoic, strong, and emotionless leads to a suppression of feelings. From a young age, boys are taught to man up, to hide vulnerability, and to suppress their emotions. This is a damaging narrative that not only impedes emotional well-being, but also stifles open conversations about physical and mental health. Can I pay tribute now to some of the excellent organisations that are working to provide men and boys with the tools and the space to talk openly about their feelings without fear of judgment or stigma. And one of them has been mentioned a moment ago. I met this week with Rob Lloyd and John Latchford from Men's Sheds, who provide spaces for men to come together, to work on crafts while developing friendships and a mutual support network. Another great example that I'm sure all members will be familiar with, and you'll have one in your constituency, is Andy's Man Club. And they're all over the country helping to end the stigma around men's mental health through the power of conversation. A similar organisation in my constituency in parts of South Durham is Man Health, which works to raise awareness and improve men's physical and mental health. This includes organising men's walks and peer support groups who meet together weekly. I attended one recently in my constituency, and I found a group of men from all walks of life sat together in a circle. The session started by each man taking turns to update the group on their week, beginning with saying how they feel on a scale of 1 to 10. And I sat listening, touched by the openness of those who were sharing and the non-judgmental kindness of those listening and offering support. And then it came to me, and the group leader asked, "Well, Sam, where are you this week?" And I froze briefly, contemplating how I should respond. Do I quickly say something positive and move on? Or do I be honest and make myself vulnerable? Do I tell the truth that this week I'm a 5, not quite rock bottom, but feeling little joy in life? Do I admit how anxious and out of place I felt in my new role? How the online abuse that all MPs get does secretly get to me? How I lie awake at night feeling overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge of meeting my voters' expectations? 5. I did it, I shared. And where I feared that maybe these men might struggle to relate to me as a member of this place, I found understanding nods and expressions of appreciation. It also lifted my spirits to be able to visit with each of them one by one and to listen to the particular stories that they wanted to share with me, because that's the thing about peer support. It's in the giving as well as in the receiving that people feel empowered. The crisis... I will.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way, and on behalf of the whole House, can I say I think he's doing an exceptionally good job. And I just on that point, I just thought he'd mentioned role models as well previously, and I think we should acknowledge the important role of men to be positive role models for other men. And thinking of young men in particular, would he agree with me that some of the situations he's described leave young men vulnerable to nefarious role models, online role models and so on, and that there's a duty on all of us older men to provide those opportunities to talk and positive role models for younger men?
Thank you, and I absolutely welcome that intervention because he makes a very important point. And before being in this place, I used to tutor for the Brilliant Club in several schools in the North East, and would often have conversations with my students. But one of the courses I taught was actually about prevention of genocide, but it would touch on issues of identity and identity-based violence and discrimination. And very often, the girls would then enter a conversation about the sorts of misogynist comments that they would receive, including up to experiences of sexual assault by boys in their class who were influenced by so-called online influences. And to name and shame one, Andrew Tate, who seems to be having a really pernicious influence on many boys, and seems to promote a version of masculinity that I believe is deeply harmful, both to boys and to the girls that they then interact with. So I think that is an excellent intervention. And in fact, I'll move on now. The crisis in men's mental health and well-being has its roots in the crisis in boys' mental health and well-being. In 2020, 122 boys aged 10 to 19 died by suicide. An analysis by Childline found that despite having more than double the suicide rate, only one boy for every 5 girls talks about mental health to Childline, and that they're even less likely to contact the service when they have suicidal thoughts. So boys as well as men appear to be suffering in silence. And health and well-being are intrinsically linked to the ability to learn. And we also know that nationally, girls are outperforming boys at every level of education, from primary school through to university. And in the North East, we have the lowest GCSE grades anywhere in the country, particularly among boys. It didn't used to be this way, of course. Back in the 70s, it was the other way around, and there was alarm at the fact that boys were outperforming girls. And significant studies done at that time explored things like language and space in the classroom, and the way that boys would dominate conversation. If you were to visit many schools today, you would see a reverse. You would see boys who are suppressed and don't feel able to speak and speak freely. So there's much evidence as well that this is not a uniform picture. There are examples of schools where boys are not underperforming. So we know that this is avoidable. It's preventable. Some of the examples from research shows that boys do, and to pick up the point we heard a moment ago, that boys need to have positive role models. And that doesn't just mean fathers and male teachers, although that's important. It can also mean older boys in the school being given responsibility to act as peer mentors to younger boys. There's also evidence of unconscious bias in teaching staff that we need to get rid of, and we need to raise expectations. And there's examples of the schools that do well, that they establish a culture of high expectations among boys. Finally, I do think we need to take seriously who and what is influencing boys. When I was growing up in the 90s, I think it was more or less taken for granted that we were in an age of progress, where our generation of young men were growing up with more respect for women and more progressive values. But again, to reference this growing move to the far right and to quite misogynist values that are being spread online, I think that progress, I'm afraid, is now in reverse, and we need to guard against boys' behaviour online. Another intervention that I think is significant and something that in other parts of my life here I'll be promoting is much earlier focus on social emotional learning in schools. That we need children to grow up learning to recognise and understand their emotions, learning to regulate them, and learning to find better ways or appropriate ways to express them. Learning greater self-awareness as well as greater social awareness, learning greater empathy for others. And these are not sort of skills that people are born with. These are skills that develop, and they develop from an early age based on the sorts of role models and interaction that children experience in the home, but also in the classroom. And there are good examples. The government in Wales, the Mayor of Manchester, of people who are taking an active role in actually rolling out programmes in schools to focus on children's social emotional learning. And I think I'll leave it there because I've talked for long enough, and I'm really conscious of colleagues in the room who will probably make important contributions to this debate and add to the points that I have raised. But I do thank everyone for convening today to discuss these issues, and I hope that we can, as a House, take these issues seriously and it not just be a debate, but be something that leads to some meaningful change.
The question is, as on the order paper. Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate the honourable friend from Bishop and Auckland for securing this debate today. Madam Deputy Speaker, where is everybody? There's nobody on the opposition besides the opposition whip. I'm quite surprised to look at the other side of the House and see these empty benches. I am sure the Shadow Secretary of State will do a great job and a great speech, but she shouldn't have to hold it all up by herself. International Men's Day was started in 1992 in Trinidad and Tobago, and we started debating International Men's Day in 2015 in this House. And I thought it was important to attend today because it's not a competition. I always attend International Women's Day, and me fighting for the rights of women doesn't in any way negate me fighting for the rights of men. And I think it's important that we do campaign, and I think it would have been nice to see more people in the House today, because I get a lot of abuse, a lot of misogynistic abuse online, with people saying, well, why don't we have an International Men's Day? Or why don't men do? Well, we're having an International Men's Day debate and the House is not full. But I think this is a great time to talk about lots of men's charities doing amazing work. In my constituency in Brent East, I have Boys to Men, Moving On, 100 Black Men in London, Men United, Leap, Social Wellness Club. And I also have a lot of barbers that do lots of great work too. They have a system where when the men and the boys come in to get their hair cut, they encourage them to talk, to have debates. Madam Deputy Speaker, they're not always great debates, I'm not saying they always make sense, but anyway, they're encouraged to talk and share, and that is important. And there's a particularly good barber shop in Brent called Visor, and they teach their young men things like timekeeping. They have to come on time to get their hair cut, or else their hair doesn't get cut. So it's all these kind of soft skills that are really important in later life. And I like to highlight them because even during COVID, they made sure they had debates around COVID, keeping safe, getting the vaccination, and that was really important. And as my honourable friend said, that there's a growing range of charities, Men's Shed, Andy's Man Club, Prostate Cancer UK doing a lot of work, Harry's Hikes, Walking Men, and there's many, many more. And I think it's important to encourage those organisations. And this year there's 3 key themes for International Men's Day. 1, making a positive difference to the well-being and lives of men and boys. 2, raising awareness and funds for charities supporting men and boys' well-being. And 3, promoting a positive conversation about men, manhood and masculinity. And my honourable friend from Bishop Auckland mentioned this also in his speech around manhood and masculinity. And this is an area that I think I'd like to talk more on today, because a lot of how societies run is centred around men, and we know that from how clothes were made for emergency services to language. And so it does stand to reason that for equity purposes, there has to be a focus, more of a focus on women. But as I said earlier, it's not as the exclusion of men. And being a man is not about being strong and silent. That is a very old thinking. And we do need to encourage more men to speak up and speak out. When it comes to health, there's 12,000 men die from prostate cancer every year. That is one man every 45 minutes. On mortality, 1 in 5 UK men do not live to 65. And suicide, 14 men die each day by suicide. It is an alarming number. And there is a continued crisis in male suicide. It is the leading cause of death under 50s. And I believe that there's a direct correlation between the increase in mental health amongst men and the growth of incels, which are involuntary celibates. That is a growing, underground, very worrying group of young men. And this movement is defined by misogyny, which believes in the idea that men have lost the genetic lottery and destined to fail with women. Incels are often poorly educated boys and men, and they justify violence against women via their ideological stances. And I think it's important that we tackle this crisis head on and send a strong message from this house that incels are not in any way a good representation of a good man. Women are not the enemy. With 1 woman killed every 3 days by a man, we need men to speak up and speak out. And we need men to be louder than the social media toxic men that have very huge platforms. And we need them to speak louder than the men with power and the men in power and some of the men soon to get power. And so we have a lot of work to do. 20% of incels contemplate suicide every day, and there are well-documented terrorist attacks and mass killings by incels. So International Men's Day is important for everyone. The world will be safer if we all work together, to respect each other and make sure we are all kept safe. And I want to end on a quote by Alex Karras, who says, "It takes more courage to reveal insecurities than to hide them, more strength to relate to people than to dominate them, more manhood to abide by thought-out principles rather than blind reflex. Toughness is in the soul and spirit, not in muscles and in an immature mind." Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Jerome Mayhew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to balance the benches and stand up for men. So I can't have it all their own way, Madam Deputy Speaker. So you may not be wholly surprised to know that I did not originally intend to make a speech in this debate, but I do want to just add a short speech in support of the community sheds and also the men's sheds in my constituency of Broadland and Fakenham that I have visited the most recent, about 2 weeks ago, the Aylsham men's shed, which welcomes women as well as men. But I've also been very interested to hear some of the comments of honourable and right honourable members this afternoon, and I've learnt a lot. And I think it's helped me to reflect on what it means to be a man. I stand before you, Madam Deputy Speaker, comfortable in my cardigan, and that's one form of manhood. Well, it's probably stretching it a little bit, but slightly more seriously, I look at my relationships with my wider friendship group, and I compare it to that of my wife. My wife is brilliant at communicating, at the small acts of kindness and connection that go to make a personal community as well as a corporate community, a community around the village, around school relationships. Compare me to her, and I'm found wholly wanting. I fit all the stereotypes where why use a sentence when a single word will do to communicate? Why pick up with old friends when you could ignore them for a few more years. And that's fine when things are going well, but we too often as men are found bereft of support when things go badly. Heaven forbid if my wife was to fall under a bus, I would be, first of all, devastated, which is the best thing that has ever happened to me. But the community support that I take for granted because of her involvement in my life and in my family would be removed. And I think all too often men are left exposed because I don't quite know why it is, but we seem to be less good and less prepared to focus and invest time in the soft relationships which go to make community, that cobweb, that network of community touchpoints, which make us strong, make us here for each other. So I've learnt a lot in this debate. I'm very grateful to the Backbench Committee and the Honourable Member for Bishop Auckland for organising this debate. I'm just going to finish by name-checking. I've already name-checked the Elsham Community Shed. There's also the Brundle Men's Shed that I've visited a couple of times. And it's easy to say, well, these tend to be men who are my age and above. But actually, they welcome young men of all ages. And one of the great strengths of these organisations is that they don't just bring men together, but they start challenging some of those age exclusions that we have too often in our communities. And they bring people of whatever age into a comfortable and welcoming and friendly environment. And it is exactly that. Whenever you go to a men's shed or a community shed, you feel welcome. It feels like a comfortable environment. It feels like you are accepted for who you are and for what you can bring. And I think there are a wonderful series of organisations. And one of their strengths is that they don't rely on the state for funding. They are a community organisation which has come up from below that supports itself both in terms of direction and in funding. But there is one area where they really do rely on the community, and it's quite difficult in some circumstances, and that is in the provision of accommodation. Now, the Elsham Community Shed is in a shared space in the high school there, which is great, but brings its challenges because you have to pack everything away at 3 o'clock because it's a shared workshop. And the Brundle Men's Shed is in a extra part of a boat shed. But again, it means that you are forever reliant on the goodwill of the wider community. And while that goodwill is there, the organisations can flourish. So if I have one message for the wider community is support your men's shed, provide them with space, and get behind them.
Yeah. Calvin Bailey.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you, and I want to congratulate my honourable friend, the member of Bishop Auckland, for bringing about today's debate and for the tone and sentiment in his message. This isn't about undermining International Women's Day, but it's a chance to highlight positive images of masculinity and the chance also to raise awareness of issues which affect men almost exclusively. So first I want to talk about one of the problems that affects many men in every part of our country, and that is the impact of prostate cancer. Last week I was delighted to join my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, at an event with prostate cancer research, highlighting the vital importance of screening for cancer that impacts 1 in 8 men, and which is second only to lung cancer as a cause of death in men. As we know, early diagnosis is essential for prostate cancer. Diagnosis at stages 1 to 3 results in a 5-year survival rate of almost 100%, if not. But if a diagnosis doesn't occur until stage 4, where the cancer is spread beyond the prostate, the survival rate is halved to 50%. In Bart's Hospital Trust, 17% of men with prostate cancer are only diagnosed at stage 4. We need to bring this proportion down, both locally and across the country, but sadly this rate has been going in the wrong direction. And not all of us face the same risks for prostate cancer. Geographically, the late diagnosis is concentrated in some areas like Scotland and the northeast of England. Areas of higher deprivation tend to have lower access to diagnosis, and despite actually having a much higher diagnosis rate, black men are 2.5 more likely to die from prostate cancer than white men, which shows that the diagnosis isn't the whole story, and we need action to improve access to the right treatment as well. So I'd be grateful for anything the Minister can say about the government's plan to improve access to screening and to help bring down those disproportionate impacts for black men. The need for faster diagnosis and more effective treatment of prostate cancer is a serious problem for men, and something I'm looking forward to taking forward alongside colleagues in the coming months with the newly formed APPG. Now, I also want to talk about another problem that men don't have, and that is worries about equality. Yesterday was Equal Pay Day, the day when an average woman stops earning in comparison to the average man. This is something that all of us should want to remedy, not just because equal pay for work is a basic fairness, but our economy and society work much better when all our contributions are valued properly. Sadly, however, teachers in Leyton and Wanstead tell me that male students now regularly question the basic idea of equal pay between men and women. And I know this will be increasingly familiar point to colleagues across the House, but I believe that as a society, we're only just starting to wake up to the threat created by far-right online influencers who weaponise masculinity. Positive examples of masculinity are not hard to find. We had plenty of them at prostate cancer event last week, and I had plenty of them in the Royal Air Force. And many boys and men have no need of masculinity. There is no need to hold a narrow few up as paragons of decency and manliness for all to imitate. Those of you that aren't aware should know that I led the evacuation of Kabul. I was in charge of the Air Forces that threw 14,500 people out of Kabul a couple of years ago now. In the documentaries and some of the television interviews that I gave afterwards, and one in particular, I may have broken down in tears alongside a friend of mine, a guy called Sergeant Andy Livingston, who stepped forward to cradle a young child when its exhausted mother collapsed during one of the evacuation flights. But what horrified me afterwards was that the articles and the discussions weren't about person finds upsetting event upsetting. It was simply the fact that someone deemed to have been in a position of power and that was a man had shown some emotions. But it's clear that the challenges faced by our young men are exposing them to radicalisation, including misogyny, racism and homophobia.
Can my honourable friend give way?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just want to pay tribute to you, my honourable friend, and to my honourable friend for raising and bringing this debate, and to say on record that I, and I'm sure the rest of the House, think you are both amazing role models for young men looking at this debate. Thank you.
That's very kind. I might start crying. Thank you. We should all understand that what challenges those are the legacy of isolation of the pandemic and a fragmented and divided society, understandably low trust in our media and social institutions, a lack of hope for the future given the dire economic growth and housing crisis they've grown up with their whole lives. Addressing these problems of restoring hope and trust are core objectives of our mission-led government and these challenges faced by all our young people. Therefore, in my view, the major difference in radicalisation isn't a greater gender rift across our society. It's that young men and boys are specifically being targeted by extremists and grifters. We should be clear how pathetic these con men are. Parasites and predators who exploit and amplify anxieties that are normal for young people. It is totally normal for teenagers to have some amount of concern about body image, their love lives, and how they fit into peer groups and wider society. It's equally normal for young people to rebel and to want to think of themselves and to establish their own identity. What isn't normal is for these anxieties to be fuelled, exploited and channelled into totally unhealthy obsessions and bigotry, setting men and boys against women and girls against each other and against the institutions that hold our liberal democracy together is unacceptable. As a society, we need to recognise this threat and defend all our young people from it. We know that young people, primarily boys, are starting out in entirely benign places, like the History Channel on YouTube or a gaming forum, and rapidly being pushed into spaces where the extremist predators dominate. Most of all, we need to get serious about the regulation of these spaces in which these extremist influences thrive. We need to make clear to social media platforms that if they continue using algorithms that are destructive to our social fabric, fuel violence against women and girls, and are harmful to our young people, they will face the consequences.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Bishop Auckland for securing this important debate. As we know, International Men's Day was on Tuesday, and the previous speaker, my friend, the member for Leyton and Wanstead, talked about his service and the horrors of war. Tuesday was also 1,000 days since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I want to put on record my thanks to all of those men who are serving on the front line in Ukraine today and who have been injured or lost their lives in that awful conflict. Many important issues around men have been raised today, and I'm in agreement with much of the sentiment of the debate, particularly on issues of health and of the dangers of social media platforms. But this debate should be inclusive of all men, and I want to affirm that trans men are men. So I'd like to commemorate the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which was yesterday, and this day is an opportunity for us to honour those murdered as a result of transphobia, and the many more who have died by suicide. This includes many trans men, and the issues I've heard debate today, including mental health and suicides, are experienced by trans men. Men and boys face incessant pressures to live up to myths and stereotypes about what masculinity and being a man is.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for giving away. Just on trans men, will my honourable friend agree with me that trans men are often missed out of the trans debate, but also are subject to some real cruel behaviour and often suffer violence against them, such as rape, and it's underreported?
Absolutely acknowledge that, and I'll be coming on to some of those issues in my speech, which mainly is about this subject. There is a fracture between the images we see in films and television of what being a man looks like and the qualities that we promote and value in our male role models. As we know, this gap is dangerous. It has made men vulnerable to increased mental health problems and death by suicide. It's debates like this one today that help us to understand the range of experiences and differences of men across the world. So I thank everyone for being here and for their honesty. I want to use this opportunity to talk about the unique issues trans men and trans masculine people face in the UK. I'm not an expert by any means, but I do know that addressing the significant marginalisation of trans men and trans masculine people benefits everybody. I want to thank all those who have educated me and continue to do so. Transactional, for example, have been doing fantastic advocacy work in Parliament, with a drop-in just last week. Trans and masculine people have historically and continue to face erasure and lack of representation in society. They are largely invisible in the media, on TV and in films, whereas we see a hyperfixation on trans women in certain parts of the media. As a result, there is a big gap in understanding the material issues that trans masculine people face. It means that access to healthcare is poor. They face an increased risk of abuse, including domestic violence and, of course, transphobia. In the world of sport, for example, gender-critical feminists are expressing high levels of concern at the possibility of including trans women. They are fighting for the same exclusion of trans women across other sex-segregated spaces, but there's silence surrounding the experience of trans men in these same conversations. This erasure leads to dangerous myths developing about the experience of trans men and a reluctance of people to try and access support or feel part of the community. Trans actually told me that generally trans men are less likely to respond to surveys, despite the most recent census revealing there are largely equal numbers of trans men and women in the UK. We must really listen to trans men and trans masculine people's needs and feelings to even begin to improve well-being and liberation. Trans men and trans masculine people face a number of barriers in accessing equal quality healthcare on the NHS. Waiting lists to receive top surgery on the NHS are now in excess of 4 to 5 years just for a consultation in England, and waiting lists are growing. This leaves a situation where trans men and trans masculine individuals are forced to pay for private care, which not everyone can do, as we know, or to put up with dysphoria and the other associated mental health impacts, which there is a lack of sector-wide support and training. Top surgery drastically improves well-being and saves lives. It isn't something nice to have for trans masculine people. Across the NHS, there needs to be a great awareness of trans men and trans masculine people who have given birth. If, for example, a trans man is not asked whether he could be pregnant before receiving a dose of radiation, there could be serious consequences. We can begin by removing gendered vocabulary from pregnancy care and parenthood. There are cases, for example, the well-known situation of Freddie McConnell, where he was unable to be listed as his child's father. The High Court ruled that even though he was considered a man by law and had a gender recognition certificate to prove it, he could not appear in his child's birth certificate as father or even parent. The same problems occur in access to cervical cancer treatment. Currently, a trans man or non-binary person with a male sex marker on their NHS record will not be included in the recall system. In this area, the law is all over the place and needs to be more input from trans people themselves. By moving to greater awareness, we can significantly improve health outcomes for all men. Male privilege, patriarchy, is bad for men. By speaking out about the varied experiences of men, we will all become more liberated. Gender diversity is a gift. To truly expand how society understands masculinity, we must bring together everybody's experiences. Thank you.
Lola McEvoy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm rising to speak on this issue because my views have evolved, and as we're all on a journey, it is because I am a woman and a feminist that I care so deeply about supporting men and boys. As a woman, I care about women's rights, and I have and will continue to raise up the voices of women who are mistreated. That does not exclude me from caring about the unique set of issues facing men and boys in our society. It drives me to take action on them. The struggle for equality is for all of us to be treated fairly, with equity of opportunity and access to the support we need for our unique challenges. I am determined to use my platform to improve the lives of men and boys in my community who are frankly desperately in need of our help. I believe we've reached a fork in the road and that this new government can deliver for both men and women without competition. It is time to change the conversation to prioritise policy and legislation based not on what those with the loudest voice want, but on our shared vision for the society we want our children to inherit. In my area, that means tackling the drivers of male suicide. Suicide amongst men is tearing through my community in Darlington and our wider region. The North East has the highest rates of deaths by suicide in England, and it has the lowest wages. Local grassroots groups are doing incredible work, rising to tackle the challenge in the absence of other support. Just last week, I attended a fundraiser in my community. It was called Strictly Step by Step, and it was run by lots of grassroots lived experience charities. They put forward one man from each of their charities to take part in this in a Strictly Come Dancing tribute. And these men were asked to leave their pride at the door and prance about in the name of progress on men's mental health. It was fantastic to see such a difficult subject, to take such a difficult subject and turn it into something utterly uplifting, and that was progress in and of itself. But the message was clear. Men need to talk, and when they ask for help, they must be able to receive it, because the lag in them seeking support is so long that it means when they do ask for it, it is a crisis point. I want to put on record in this debate how honoured I am to be able to advocate for the memory of so many I've never met and in memory of too many that I've known. But I also want to pay tribute to those who are taking their personal pain and turning it into progress for others. To Tracy and David, the parents of Dylan and Quinn, to Hilary, the mother of George, and to Harvey's dad, Michael, those in Man Health, Engage, and in Andy's Man Club who are leading in our area, I hope that you can take a small amount of comfort from knowing how much I and our wider community value your work. I'm determined to use my time in this place to improve and drive suicide prevention strategies, employment opportunities in our area, mental health support, paternity rights, online safety, and veteran support services. All of these measures, if not tackled, will continue to push men and boys into crisis. So I'll finish on this. As a woman, I know what it's like to have to struggle to get a fair deal, and it's because of that that I am determined we do not allow a lost generation of our men and boys.
I call John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. International Men's Day UK seeks to promote a positive conversation about men, manhood and masculinity, and I do indeed believe that we need to debate definitions of masculinity. Why? Because often outdated social mores about masculinity still all too often permeate society and influence boys' and men's behaviour. And so we need to challenge stereotypes. Being a strong male should not equate with being unkind, nor eschewing being creative, nor hiding one's feelings. I'll provide a couple of examples, one from the distant past and one the more recent past. Perhaps we should remember, as we hold this debate, that knights, princes and kings of old were expected to be poets, musicians, dancers, linguists, and much more, as well as soldiers, leaders, and so on. It wasn't one or the other. And more recently, not many people know that our current Special Air Service, the best special forces in the world, alongside, of course, the SBS, in case any of them are watching, comprises 21st SAS Regiment bracket artists, a regiment of the Army Reserve. Reference to artists is because a volunteer regiment had been formed in the 19th century, named the Middlesex Artists Rifle Volunteer Corps, and more latterly the Artists' Rifles. Formed of painters, sculptors, musicians, architects, engravers, and actors, tough and creative. Its enlisted men and officers fought in the Second Boer War and the First World War. And after the Second World War, the Artists' Rifles was renamed as I mentioned, 21st SAS Artists Volunteers. So it's vital that we challenge stereotypes, not as some academic thought experiment, because the effect on boys and men of these misplaced conceptions about manhood can be horrific regarding their mental health. Men, sadly, account for 3/4 of suicides. They accounted for 3/4 of suicides in 2023, 4,506 tragedies. 17.4 deaths per 100,000, the highest level since 1999. This is horrific, tragic for the individuals and their friends and families, and is also unnecessary. I want to touch on an example from my constituency of Rugby, where men are getting together to do something about this terrible situation. Back and Forth Men's Mental Health in my constituency was founded in 2023 after the suicide of a friend of one of the founder members. It's based on a simple idea to organise regular walks for men struggling with all aspects of life. They've grown to having 1.7 thousand followers in a year and have achieved charity status. Encouraging communication is at their core because their biggest challenge is to break down the stigma of talking about mental health and its associated social anxiety. My constituents in Rugby will benefit from their Christmas breakfast event in December, their social evenings and, of course, their walks, and indeed, they have a podcast, which is a very good listen. One of their members has said, "The group," I quote, "the group has helped me find my purpose in life again." So I thank my honourable friend, the member for Bishop Auckland, for securing this very important and timely debate, and for his impressive speech and for the thoughtful contributions of others across the House. There is so much more to do, but it is, of course, within this challenge important to redefine masculinity. It's important that we support charities that work to break the stigma around mental health. And it's important that we send a message to boys and men that kindness is a strength, admitting your feelings is a strength, and being creative is a strength. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, that they must always, always seek help, whether from a friend and, if needed, medical support, if their mental health is ever at risk.
I call Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I start by thanking my honourable friend, for the member for Bishop Auckland, for securing this really important debate. I was very touched to hear his powerful speech, and I wanted to touch on just two points that he raised so very eloquently. Firstly, he rightly reminded us that there are, of course, many ways to be a man and many forms of masculinity. I have to say that as a young gay man growing up in Berkshire in the 90s, this is something that I struggled with as I grew up, and took me many years to learn and feel comfortable in my own form of masculinity. So I wanted to thank him for reflecting on that. I also wanted to thank him for so powerfully emphasising that gender inequality affects everyone. And I don't think there can be any disagreement across the House on that important point. International Men's Day is an opportunity to remember the frankly dreadful health outcomes affecting too many men in society, particularly when it comes to mental and emotional health. And I emphasise that emotional health, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Other members have raised the alarming suicide statistics facing men. In England and Wales, male suicide is 3 times more common than for women. And last year, among men aged 20 to 34, suicide was the leading cause of death and was responsible for over a quarter of deaths for men in this age range. And I mention these statistics for England and Wales largely because I couldn't find regional or even better local authority data. And I'm grateful for the House of Commons Library for highlighting these figures, but you know, the lack of data at a more granular level really struck me as something that would be good to address. Madam Deputy Speaker, as well as International Men's Day, on Monday we will be recognising White Ribbon Day, and I proudly wear my white ribbon today. The theme for this year's White Ribbon Day is "It Starts With Men," and I think that's a poignant reminder again that domestic violence and violence against women and girls is not just a women's issue, it's also a men's issue, and it is too often rooted in harmful masculine norms. At this point, I will just place on record the very important point that I don't think can be emphasised enough, that domestic abuse, of course, affects men as victims too, and it's really important we acknowledge that. But Bracknell Forest has the highest rate of domestic abuse incidents in Berkshire, and for that reason I'm very grateful that this government has set out its mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. And what is the connection between domestic abuse and violence against women and girls and men's suicide? Well, for me, Madam Deputy Speaker, both are proof that men are too often not getting the support they need. And in the most extreme cases, this lack of support is leading to violence against themselves and against those around them. The two issues are, I think, intrinsically linked. Last week, I was privileged to visit a fantastic local charity in my constituency, Youthline, who do amazing work offering free counselling services for children and counselling at a reduced cost for their families. I was fascinated to hear about the support they offer young people dealing with complex emotional difficulties, and I'm sure everyone in this house can remember even how the most loved and nourished child can face emotional difficulties growing up. It is a difficult time for the best of, not for the best of us, I should rephrase that, for those in the best circumstances. But for those facing challenges, it is often a hopelessly difficult time of life. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, 3/4 of the users of that service are girls. And too often, I was told, boys are referred to that fantastic service not to support their mental or emotional health, but because of behaviour issues, because of a perception that they are misbehaving. When actually, the root cause of that is a failure to support them through difficult emotional and mental health. I was also privileged to visit a fantastic youth club in my constituency, The Ways, where they talked to me about the work that they do to support girls and boys to engage with the difficulties of growing up, and poignantly reminded me that sometimes boys do find it harder to talk. So actually giving them the space to do so, often through activities, rather than sort of direct conversation, can have a real positive impact on the outcome for young boys. Prevention is always more effective than intervention, and that is such an important point. So, with that in mind, it's really welcome to see the government's work on bringing more mental health services into the community and focusing on prevention, with an additional 8,500 mental health workers promised by this government. And I would really welcome the Minister giving us an update on the delivery of those additional mental health workers. But fundamentally, what we must do to support boys and men with their mental and emotional health is provide the spaces for them to talk through their issues in a way that supports them to do so. Now, other members have raised the fantastic work of Andy's Man Club, and very early on in my time as the MP for Bracknell, I was privileged to be invited along to attend an Andy's Man Club meeting, just as my honourable friend, the member for Bishop Auckland, was. And like him, I was deeply touched and moved by the fantastic work they did in my community to reach men who have for too long been failed by a system that isn't very well geared to listening to them and encouraging them to speak and talk about their difficulties. And I think what was most moving and affecting on me was seeing how this service isn't being delivered by trained mental health professionals at all. It's being delivered by other men who have experienced similar difficulties in talking, in sharing their emotional difficulties, in supporting each other through their mental health charities, through their mental health difficulties. And that was a powerful, powerful reminder of the need for us all to provide and support the spaces needed to allow the important conversations to take place. Thank you.
I now call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Dr. Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling me to speak. And I have to say that the member for Bishop Auckland was really eloquent, especially in the opening of his speech when he was discussing the work he's done in other countries and in the UK to address gender inequality, and acknowledging the gender pay gap and acknowledging the violence against women and girls from men. And and explaining how that doesn't undermine the need to discuss male issues and male-specific issues on International Men's Day. There's so many issues that we could touch on, and many of them have been spoken about by various members of this House. As the Liberal Democrat mental health spokesperson, I'll focus primarily on mental health. As we know, men are 3 times more likely than women to die by suicide, and since 1981, the suicide rate among women has approximately halved, and yet it has only been reduced by 9% among men. And we know that this is related to 12.5% of men at any given time having a mental health disorder, and men are twice as likely to die of alcohol-specific causes. Men are around twice as likely to have substance abuse problems. They're less likely to have equal access to children, and 82% of rough sleepers are men. I know that is partly related to mental health issues as well as physical health issues. And on that note, I just want to pay tribute to some of the amazing charities in Winchester. There's Emmaus, there's the Winchester Beacon, there's Trinity Winchester, who are homeless charities who work really hard to make sure that homeless people have a safe place, they have support, they can get back on their feet, they're not stuck out on the street, and they can engage with social services, and the staff and the volunteers and the supporters and even the council who support those charities do an incredible job. And tomorrow I will be visiting Trinity Winchester with another charity called Street Vet, which are vets who treat the pets, the dogs of homeless people. And that's not primarily an animal welfare issue. It's because that homeless people with dogs are much less likely to take part in risk-taking behaviour, much more likely to engage with social services, and much more likely to get off the streets quicker. So these are multifactorial issues. They're complex. They almost always include some kind of mental health issue, but there's so many different ways we can come together to address those. And one thing that's really struck me is how we're all much closer to becoming homeless than we are to becoming a millionaire, no matter what our status in life. Another organisation I want to talk about is the Farm Community Network. I grew up on a small family farm in a rural area, and I also work as a vet with rural communities. And we know that farmers have a very high suicide rate. Although there are a lot more women getting involved in farming now, and increasingly so, which is a really good thing, it's still very male-dominated. And and the mental health of farmers has been a specific concern for a long time. But I do remember about 5 years ago going to a Farm Community Network meeting where they had a farmer he was visiting from Australia, and he had a mental health breakdown. And he was giving a talk about his journey, about his mental health breakdown, and about how he got help and how he got through it. And what really surprised me was that there were several hundred other farmers who had turned up to hear this talk, and then they were all discussing mental health with each other afterwards. A huge majority of these farmers were middle-aged and older. And I remember thinking that this does show how much progress we've made about men discussing mental health, because certainly my father, he died a few years ago at the age of 83, but I don't think that he would ever have discussed mental health. He wouldn't have certainly talked to his friends about mental health issues or any struggles he'd got. And farming's one of those industries where you have to be a problem solver, you work alone, you have to be tough, you work in difficult conditions, and it sort of shapes people to look like they don't want to show what they see as signs of weakness, when actually we know that people working in isolation in tough situations need to rely on each other for help. Apologise, I was trying to remember the name of your constituency so I can keep parliamentary protocol. But yeah, the member for Leyton and Wanstead spoke very clearly about the 12,000 men a year who die from prostate cancer, and and we know that mental health, prostate cancer, they're the two biggest issues that get discussed when we think about men and men's health. There's so many other issues as well, but they're two of the very, very top ones. And I just want to, at this moment, thank all the women who support men with health issues and mental health issues, because we know it's often women who ask men to go and get checked out when they have a health issue. We know it's them that urge their partners, their sons, to go and get counselling. And we know, and I include myself in this, men are really bad at proactively going and seeking help, and the nudges that we get from women and the support we get, it must save so many lives. I also want to acknowledge, we've discussed a lot about the fact that men and boys underperform than women throughout their educational career currently. And we've also discussed the huge issues that we have with increasing radicalisation, especially online, like misogyny. We touched on the effect of people like Andrew Tate and the effect it's having on impressionable young men who sometimes feel they're not having all the opportunities that they feel that they deserve. And we know that throughout history, men have had more power and more access to finances and more influence than women. I'd like to take this moment on a debate on International Men's Day, especially as a man privileged enough to be in this chamber, to call for more research and support into endometriosis, because that is a underdiagnosed disease of women. It is a diagnosis that is often a delayed diagnosis, and there hasn't been a huge amount of research into it. And there's many women struggling with endometriosis the same way that men are struggling with mental health issues. And as the member for Bishop's Auckland pointed out on a couple of examples, that men's health issues affect women and women affect men, and that we shouldn't separate these. We should be working together and making sure we support each other, because that's what we have to do going forward. And finally, to echo everyone else's comments, as someone who was a trustee of a mental health charity for 7 years, it's so important to try and just speak to each other, to talk to each other if we're struggling. And and I was really pleased when one of my constituents who I met in the pub, he came up to say hello. He's called Chris North. He's a trustee of a charity called Loose Heads, and they came in last week to visit me in Parliament with the two founders, Dave and Rob. And they are a charity that was based primarily in rugby clubs, and their aim is to get a mental health lead in every single rugby club. And a little bit like farmers, it's a fairly alpha male environment traditionally, although that is changing. And they're aware that if you get into communities, into teams, into places like clubhouses where men are going to anyway, and can encourage them to open up and talk and have peer-to-peer support, that is where you can make a huge difference. And last week I also met someone called Sam Burge, who's a farmer from Winchester, and he's the local volunteer for the Farm Community Network, and he's talking about the importance of peer-to-peer support. And certainly when I saw the breakdown of the calls to the Farm Community Network last week, that they get calls from a whole variety of issues, but mental health support and mental well-being was the top of the list. And it was really encouraging to see that these initiatives like the Loose Heads and the rugby clubs and the Farm Community Network are really encouraging men to reach out for help with their mental health. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Mims Davies.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as normal, a Thursday afternoon of backbench business debates means that we're more collegiate than ever. And I think the discussion this afternoon around slaps was extremely welcoming and very surprising, the amount of people that have been caught in that process, whether in the political arena or elsewhere. May I associate myself with the absolute titan of politics, and the tributes played to Lord Prescott. He was revered and respected across this House, and I think he put the fun into politics, and we have to enjoy this game occasionally, I think. Yes, of course.
On the note, I'd like to add a tribute to Lord Prescott. I remember a few years ago reading a newspaper article where he'd opened up about his struggles with bulimia and how he used to eat through an entire a restaurant menu, or he would drink condensed milk and then go home and vomit it up. And I thought, that must have taken a huge amount of courage, especially this must have been around 15 years ago. You know, a former merchant seaman, a very much a boxer, to better talk about his trouble with eating disorders, you know, which we know men do suffer from as well. And I think this is a really good day to pay tribute to what an impact that must have had to the many men who have eating disorders, to have someone like that be so open about it.
Yeah. I thank the honourable gentleman for absolutely raising that, and I think in my time in this House in the last 10 years, the way that our men in this House sent to this place have made such a difference. The work that they do in their constituencies, comfortably in surgeries, and are able to actually bring that to the chamber, and we're all the richer for it. So I absolutely agree. May I thank the honourable member from Bishop Auckland for securing this backbench business debate. An excellent speech, really thought-provoking, a really important opening speech, and it is a pleasure to respond on behalf of His Majesty's official and loyal opposition. And I'm also very pleased to be the co-chair, if we get a chance to actually meet on this, of the reconstituted all-party parliamentary group on men and boys. So anybody around the room who would like to join us, you're extremely welcome. And I'd like to pay tribute to the predecessor in the role, Nick Fletcher, no longer in this place, but like all former members who served in the all-party parliamentary group, it really put some of this on the record. And I may also extend my thanks to the Secretariat, which is Equilaw, for their work. So please do join us because there's clear affinity here. It's an opportunity today, Madam Deputy Speaker, to thank and support our menfolk, our dads, our brothers. I have a wonderful brother, I'm very lucky. Husbands, sometimes even ex-husbands, who would have thought that? Sons, grandsons, uncles, granddads, people who are like a father to you, our male friends. And as the Shadow Minister for Women, our male allies that do so much when it comes to women's causes, and even this afternoon we've heard that in the chamber. And local groups really do matter. Last year on Christmas shopping night in Uckfield, I saw all of the work of the Uckfield Men's Shed, and that's coming up shortly. I'm looking forward to seeing that again. And some of my constituents attend the Burgess Hill Men's Shed, and it really makes a big difference. The wider charity work mentioned today, from Mankind, for example, who support male victims of domestic violence, talking about that stigma of domestic violence. Domestic violence is criminality in the home. And that is whether you are male or female. And it's absolutely right that we tackle that violence and criminality wherever it is found. Man Up, a great charity in terms of male mental health. Calm, the campaign against living miserably, often helping men with their support. And of course it's Movember, but I see my honourable friend here has done a little more than a moustache. The Movember Foundation, focusing on mental health, men's health, prostate cancer, and talking about testicular cancer as well. We've had some excellent speeches, interventions from the honourable member from Strangford, who's giving himself a little bit of time off, about the impact of young men and male suicide. The honourable lady from Brent, who I work with in the all-party group for women parliamentarians, talked about rights not being a zero-sum game. And I'm off to the hairdressers tomorrow. I'm delighted to know that the barbers in her patch are great places to share conversations. It's really important. My honourable friend from Broadland and Fakenham came in to talk about about his cardigan, but equally to talk about the importance of groups in his community and the environment created by men's sheds and paid tribute to them. The Honourable Member from Wanstead, Leyton and Wanstead, talking about health matters for men and the bravery and powerful importance of talking about emotion in men, and that it should be the norm, and that still needs to be challenged. The Honourable Member from Leeds Central and Headingley talked about the men that have stepped up in Ukraine and come to the work that we need in war and the sacrifices, the challenges of social media and the importance of tackling transphobia. The Honourable Member from Darlington spoke about true equality, valuing the community by the action of men. And the Honourable Member from Rugby speaking about male stereotypes, very important to tackle that. And the thoughtful speech from the Honourable Member from Bracknell talking about life as a young gay man. I'm very proud of the change in this place in the last 10 years in terms of representation, equal marriage, and the work that my party and all parties have done, and that we welcome so roundly everybody with every different background to be part of our great political institutions. So this year's theme of International Men's Day on Tuesday, of course, was around positive role models. And we can all think, as I say, of a particular male role model in our lives, maybe even the reason that we're here today. And for most of us, that may be our own fathers. Academic research shows how pivotal an early role model for children can be in terms of citing impacts on behaviour and cognitive development. And wearing our white ribbons as White Ribbon Day approaches this year, the theme is preventing men's violence against women and girls. It starts with men. The message is that we can address, Madam Deputy Speaker, the attitude and behaviours together, that we can affect positive behavioural change by promoting true gender equality, by working together with our men and boys. So positive role models are really important. It's estimated that 1 million children in the UK do not have meaningful contact with their fathers, described as twice or more contact a year. This is deeply troubling. What's also deeply troubling is, and very tragic, is the largest killer of men, as we've heard today, of those under the age of 40 is suicide. Many of us will know boys and young men in particular who we've lost or we know of. It is so important to be there to listen, to have the opportunity to have men opening up, and we encourage and implored people, men and women, to do that. The suicide prevention strategy set out by the previous Conservative government tackling suicide is really a priority. The then Shadow Minister said it would be a priority for any incoming Labour government, and I hope that that can be reaffirmed today, and I'd appreciate any update to the House on any ambitions there. I think today we talked about challenging expectations of manhood, that male diversity of expectations is important. Men at the nativity, men on the school run, men taking the lead when it comes to childcare, when it comes to cleaning, household chores. That, ladies, is real equality. Now, last year, a men's health ambassador was to be appointed to lead a task force to continue to look at those health issues faced by men. I'd be grateful if the Minister can update the House on this position. If I could just turn to the Honourable Member in Winchester, who rightly pointed out farmers and loneliness. I'm very proud that in government we brought forward the Minister for Loneliness, the isolating struggle of working on the lands and the tragic impact that without support, gambling, addiction, substance abuse, divorce, relationship breakdown, bereavement, career issues, men very often identified by their career and their employment opportunities, the impact of money worries and job losses. On top of that, issues perhaps around body image. And I agree that we need the spaces to talk, such as Andy's Men's Club, and also the power of men supporting men as equally as women supporting women. So whether it is the PDSA screening and the work around prostate cancer, or innovations when it comes to detection and treatment on that. This is very important. And we know that boys in cohorts do underperform, low passing in GCSEs and higher education, and that it's really important that social mobility and aspiration, opportunity for all, particularly for white working class boys, is absolutely tackled, as it's still too often left behind. I'd like to close, because I'm sure I need to, by commending all members of the House today for focusing on improving the outcomes for men across their constituencies. Men and women in this world are a partnership. Our men matter. Your dreams, your hopes, your goodness shines through. Your well-being is our well-being, and true equality is a shared opportunity for all, a shared understanding and shared success and choice. And I'll use my time in this House to help men and boys in my constituency to thrive, and that means being able to be understood and valued on International Men's Day and beyond.
I call Minister.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. And before I start, may I just pay a huge tribute to Lord John Prescott, albeit that he caused great consternation to my very good friend, the member for Newport East, when she was standing right behind him as General Secretary of Welsh Labour during a certain incident in North Wales. But I'm sure John would have welcomed today's debate, campaigning tirelessly as he did to extend opportunities to champion workers' rights, and, as the Lib Dem spokesperson has mentioned, opening up on his own mental health. So my sincere sympathies to his family at this time. He'll be sorely missed, but fondly remembered. Well, we've had a very positive and very constructive debate today in that lovely consensual way on a Thursday afternoon, where we look at the real issues. We try to think, how can we tackle some of these? What are the things that we need to do? I'm very pleased to be able to wind up for this debate, celebrating, as we do, International Men's Day, and joining with 80 countries in marking the contribution that men make to our world. And I'd really like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Bishop Auckland, making sure that we have this opportunity. And of course, he is the co-chair of the APPG on Boys and Men, and now we found out who the other co-chair is. So I'm sure there's a great partnership there, and that we'll hear a great deal more from them about the priorities and things that we need to tackle. I'd like to thank all the members who've taken part as well. We've certainly had a very, very thoughtful array of contributions. In particular, of course, the member for Bishop Auckland, starting out on the discussions today, was man enough and brave enough to open up on his own issues and how he shared those with one of his local groups. And there have been so many local groups that have been mentioned in today's debate and the excellent work that they've done. But as my honourable friend for Bishop Auckland outlined, some of the main issues are health, suicide, the issue of crime, whether it be committing or being victim, the issue of exclusion from schools, the social and cultural expectations, and the need for positive male role models, and of course a large focus on mental health, educational, entertainment, and the position of influencers. And then we heard from my honourable friend, the member for Brent East, again mentioning a number of very important organisations in her constituency, mentioning again the issue of prostate cancer, but also that pernicious issue of the subculture in South and the harm that it is causing. We then heard from the member from Broadland and Fakenham, who mentioned his own excellent volunteer groups such as the Elsham Men's Sheds. And then we heard from my honourable friend from Leyton and Wanstead, and he particularly again talked about young men being targeted by extremists when they are genuinely considering all those teenage issues that you do, your body image, your relationships, in a perfectly normal way, but then they're being targeted with horrendous misogyny, bigotry, homophobia, and setting them against the institutions that keep our society together. So there's so much that we need to do. And as he mentioned, it's about restoring hope that they have a future and that we can help them achieve their goals. We then heard from my honourable friend for Leeds Central and Headingley, and he focused very, very clearly on the issues of trans men and issues of transphobia. And I would just say to him that the government is absolutely committed to ensuring that trans people can receive the care and the support that they need when accessing NHS services, and that we as a government do frequently engage with a wide range of stakeholders in this area, including the LGBT plus health advisor, Dr. Michael Brady. Then my honourable friend from Darlington talked about the need for men to talk and the need to be able to access the services that they need. And she talked about the whole range, right from the time of needing paternity leave right to veterans, the whole age range, Madam Deputy Speaker, of need for support for men. And then my honourable friend for Rugby talked about tackling stereotypes, and it reminded me of a quite old-fashioned head teacher that I once worked under in a school in Swansea, who said to the boys, "If you want to be in the rugby team, you must be in the choir." Same sort of idea, breaking down those stereotypes that men shouldn't be doing artistic and wonderful creative things as well as doing physical things. But then he mentioned, of course, the tragedy of suicides, and again mentioned organisations in his constituency who have done very good work to try and help men in that respect. Then my honourable friend from Bracknell again mentioned the issue of stereotypes and the pressures of those stereotypes, men's suicide and the need for support for men, and particularly mental health support and the need to encourage men to talk. And then the spokesperson for the Lib Dems mentioned about farmers and how extraordinary it was to find middle-aged farmers now opening up and how welcome that is. But again, he mentioned the issue of prostate cancer and how, I'm sure as a doctor, he would give that advice to every man to get checked, etc. The need to be open about health and to talk about it and get on with it. Indeed.
Just to clarify, I'm a vet, not a human doctor.
Honourable members opening maiden speech. Yes, I do remember I do remember very clearly. None of us will ever forget. You'll remember. Yeah, okay. But I'm sure, nevertheless, as a vet, you would still urge. No. I think we'd all urge men to get checked out, wouldn't we? And then, of course, the spokesperson for the opposition talked about collegiate debate that we've had, and obviously how we have male allies helping on women's issues, women allies helping on male issues, how the importance of the voluntary groups and positive role models are so important in this area. So turning now to mental health, we know that many men and boys with mental health issues are still not getting the support or care they need, with men shockingly 3 times more likely to die from suicide than women. That's why this government will fix the broken system and ensure we give mental health the same attention and focus as physical health. We intend to provide access to specialist mental health professionals in every school in England, and we recruit an additional 8,500 mental health workers across children and adult services. And we've already started to make changes. Earlier this month, we introduced a mental health bill to modernise the Mental Health Act. This will ensure not only that our legislation is fit for the 21st century, but that men and boys get the crucial support that they need. Sadly, men are 3 times more likely to die from suicide than women, and this government is absolutely committed to tackling suicide as one of the biggest killers in this country. As part of this, the 8,500 new mental health staff we will recruit will be specifically trained to support people at risk to reduce the lives lost to suicide. The Suicide Prevention Strategy for England, published in September 2023, identifies a number of groups for tailored or targeted action at a national level, including children and young people and middle-aged men, and we are exploring opportunities to go further. 79 organisations have been allocated funding from the two-year 2023 to 2025 £10 million Suicide Prevention Grant Fund and are delivering a broad and diverse range of activity that will prevent suicide and help save lives. The charity Second Step in Bristol, for example, provides men who are in psychological distress or have recently self-harmed but who aren't in contact with mental health services with short-term emotional and practical support interventions via their Hope project, including developing support plans that give people hope. Users of this service have said that this work is life-changing. And now, while we know that there are gendered health impacts, there's still much that we don't know. However, we remain determined to reduce health inequalities wherever they fall. And as I've just mentioned, one thing we can all get behind is working with NHS England, partnering with Prostate Cancer UK. And I'd like to take this opportunity to repeat the message of that important campaign. Use Prostate Cancer's UK Risk Checker, understand your level of risk, and make an informed choice about whether to have further tests. We are working with Prostate Cancer UK to launch Transform, a nationwide screening study supported by £16 million of government funding, so that we can ensure men receive a diagnosis as soon as possible. Then there are those illnesses that are simply more prevalent amongst men. Men are more likely than women to consume alcohol at harmful levels. They're also more likely to smoke and suffer from addiction. Ensuring that they have access to help and support that works for them is crucial to breaking the cycle. That's why it's so important that in addition to the public health grant, DHSC has allocated local authorities a further £267 million in 2024-2025 to improve the quality and capacity of drug and alcohol treatment and recovery. Alongside the steps we are taking to support smokers to quit and provide gambling support services, this represents a huge commitment to ensuring men are able to break that cycle of addiction and disadvantage. Now we know that the pressure on men, particularly young men, to achieve an idealised body image has increased in recent years. Now, whilst the impact of body image on girls has been taken seriously, when it comes to boys, it can be trivialised, despite having wide-reaching consequences. That's why, through statutory health education, secondary school pupils are taught about the similarities and differences between the online world and the physical world. Body image is explicitly covered in the topic of internet safety and harms, but can also be covered in topics such as respectful relationships, online and media, mental well-being, and physical and health and fitness. The teacher training modules on these topics are free to download. And I would just like to mention, in trying to combat some of the misogyny, some of the very undesirable influences that we've heard about online, one initiative that has been taken in Wales, where they have been using influencers as positive role models from Welsh sports teams, Welsh musicians, and popular entertainment streams like reality television in order to generate a really positive response. For example, Ben Davies, Joe Morrell, and David Brooks from the Football Association of Wales got together for a locker room chat around positive masculinity and what men can do to help women feel safe in public. This content was released to tie in with Wales's Euro qualifiers and White Ribbon Day. So we've heard today about the many problems, but there is hope, of course, and I'd like to pay a huge tribute to all those organisations who are working so hard to try to make this hope a reality and are trying to offer support, whether in a small or a more extended way, to men up and down the country. In my own constituency, I'd like to highlight the work of Llanelli Men's Sheds, who've recently moved into new premises in North Dock, and they, of course, are part of the wider Men's Sheds Cymru and part of the wider Men's Sheds movement across the UK. They and many other organisations like them create those important spaces to improve men's health and well-being. And last year I was able to meet an inspirational men's support group run by the Stroke Association, where they can discuss how a stroke has affected them physically, mentally and emotionally. Now, I can assure you that we as a government will take very, very seriously all the issues that have been raised today, and I look forward to hearing many more discussions across the House, both about the issues and problems that men face, but also about the much wonderful work that is being done to help men. And long may we continue to work together to tackle the challenges that men can face.
Sam Rushworth to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I thank everybody who's participated in the debate today. I wish every day in this chamber were more like Thursday afternoons, where I think we've really practised a kinder, more respectful politics. So I really appreciate that. I won't have time to do justice to everybody's speeches, but I'll probably write to some of you and to thank you for particular comments that members have made. Something that did strike me in the contributions today were the number of members who talked very movingly about voluntary work and charities in their communities. There was one mentioned by the member for Brent East, and I can't read my writing well enough to know what it was, but I'll have to check Hansard for that. But there was the member for Darlington mentioned work with veterans, and we've got some fabulous veterans charities in our area in Durham. Not least Safa, who I've worked with. The member for Bracknell talked about Youth Line. The member for Winchester talked about street vets, the Farmers Community Network and Loose Heads. And in mentioning actually the Farmers Community Network, we have a wonderful organisation in my area called UTAS, which is the Upper Teesdale Agricultural Support Service, and they do really important work, including supporting the mental health of our farming communities. And I mention this because, and there's also Mankind, Calm, Movember, Men's Sheds, Andy's Men's Club. I could go on. And I just mention this because I am always in absolute awe at the people who, after a long day at work, dedicate their time to serving others in their community without asking for anything in return. And it's one of that culture of volunteering, I think, is one of the things that makes Britain great and for which I think we can all be proud. I'm grateful also to the tributes that were paid to John Prescott. And the right mention that of his courage talking about eating disorders, and I'm pleased that other people have brought that into the debate, because I think that is another emerging challenge for young men today. Then if I may just mention a couple more things briefly. Things that I think I'm grateful that the Minister responds and could take away. Social emotional learning on the curriculum is so important. That work around positive masculinities in the classroom. That important work that this government's committed to around mental health workers. The importance of strengthening and supporting the charity sector. Calls for a men's health minister that I hope would be considered. And as the member opposite mentioned as well, the importance of security for men at work, which is so important in tackling men's ill mental health. And thank everybody again for the contributions today.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.